Hi, folks. Dennis Allen. Welcome to our episode, Good Work, on the Disciple Dilemma. If you've been keeping an eye on the headlines, you know that pulling work from China is U.S. job number one for our supply chains, and that the trade crafts are really the most understaffed sector of the U.S. business world. Now, the reality is people just don't want to work in trade crafts. From construction to manufacturing, younger people are not going there, and we need them there. But if we're honest, young people not going there is the same problem we're having at church. How does all this fit in with your world as a leader, both in the business world and in the church world? Well, let's talk about good work today. Are work and discipleship supposed to be two separated worlds? This episode of the Disciple Dilemma is designed to convince you that the answer is a resounding no. Work and discipleship is one and the same. So, how do leaders as disciples do that? And with Generation Z particularly, how does work and our discipleship merge up so people can hear us? Our guest today is Dave Hataj. Dave is the president and owner of Edgerton Gear. It's a Wisconsin-based custom gear manufacturer where he has worked for over 30 years with a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Irvine, a master's in systems theory, and a doctorate in transformational leadership from Bakke University in Dallas. Dave gets people and he gets work. His story, becoming a Christ follower in the episode today, allowed him to see Christ and corporate life as compatible. David then went and founded Craftsman with Character, a fabulous program to provide identity and purpose and meaning in the wonderful calling of tradecraft, inspiration, meaning, and purpose for young people. Dave's also the author of the book, Good Work, How Blue-Collar Business Can Change Lives, Communities, and the World. Let's tune in and listen to a fabulous conversation for leadership. Whether you're in the church world or corporate life, you need to hear this conversation about good work and leading the younger generation.
And we're not preaching at them. I call those of us who teach it, we call ourselves facilitators. We're facilitating a discussion, asking what's inside of these kids and what are they thinking and have they ever thought about this, etc. And they're telling us this is the first time anybody listened to them, anybody ever asked these questions. And so in the course of 16 weeks, we're seeing this phenomenal transformation where these kids for the first time in their life are going, wow, maybe I do have a place.
Dave, we're just delighted to have you on the podcast. I remember the first time I called you and you asked me about my background, and I said, like Jesus, I was in manufacturing most of my life. And you laughed and said, why haven't I met you before? And then you told me your story. I think it'd be really helpful, Dave, if you gave us your story right now so that we know some of your background and the people who are tuning in know how in the world you ended up in manufacturing, when originally becoming a Christian, you thought being a Christian meant being a minister.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me on, Dennis and Raymond. This is a real privilege. And yeah, we definitely connected right out of the gate because, I grew up in the gear shop. My dad started this place in 1962, the year before I was born. And, he didn't have any faith at the time. We have a legacy of alcoholism in our family. So the shop was, dirty, dark, dangerous, a party place. And that's what I grew up in. And I just thought this is what life would be. And I wasn't a person that any of my high school teachers considered me college material. In fact, it never even came up in my whole 12 grades of school. And I think it was just expected that I work in the shop. And I did since age 5. So I started my apprenticeship at right out of high school, but I was already pretty far along since I'd been running an engine lathe since I was 15, power hacksaw since I was 5, etc. And I was following my dad's footsteps. I mean, drinking and carousing and doing all those things that young men often do. And Lord got a hold of me at age 19, where I was depressed, suicidal, no sense of purpose, didn't know where I fit in, been working the shop for so long. And there's got to be more to life. And so in kind of a road to Damascus experience, the Lord got a hold of me and turned my world upside down. And I often ask the question of people, what happens when a young man gets grabbed by the Lord and gets all zealous and what do you do? Well, the typical path is, well, you should be going into ministry, right? It's ministry. So started working in the church as a youth director, volunteered first, and then through a series of events and mentors, I ended up in California with Athletes in Action, Campus Crusades branch at that time, and moved out there as their first triathlete at that time, because endurance sports was my way of kind of, just being alone and shutting out some of the pain in my life, and just kind of, trying to figure out life. And so I get out there and everybody says, oh my gosh, you're meant to be a pastor. So I ended up I got hired in a church, big mega church out in Newport Beach, California. And I was asked to be a pastor to college students, even though I'd never been to college, which was, again, the Lord's sense of humor. It was actually quite funny. But I didn't know it, and I didn't know anything. All I knew was to pray, read my Bible, and worship. And our little ministry of 10 students exploded to almost 150 within a year. And then the church got worried. They said, we got this uneducated hick from Wisconsin running our college ministry. And they put in some controls in place that was not healthy. I'll just leave it at that. And I ended up burning out, and I won't get into the whole story, but they forced me out, which was a real blessing. They said, we're going to ask you to resign because
Dave, before you move on, those kinds of stories are really interesting to us, because one of the things that we've talked about with other people in discipleship is they get kicked out of the church when they start getting serious about discipleship. So I don't think it's that you don't need to name names, but what exactly happened? Were you chasing the girls, or were you trying to do discipleship?
No, it's funny you bring that up, because my whole thing at that time was, I'm not interested in going broad. I want to go deep with people, and I think that's what Jesus calls us to do. So we were having prayer meetings. We were, and it's amazing what God was doing and changing these young people's lives. The Spirit would just show up, and it was just phenomenal. And the church decided, no, you're uneducated. We need to do something different. So they started another group in parallel to our college group to siphon off some of the college students, or the graduated college students, into a group. And they made it, the best music, the kind of some of the best teaching. They made it really kind of sexy and glamorous. And it was really frustrating for me, because they decided to go broad instead of deep. But and I'm dealing with young people that have depression issues, all those issues, addiction issues, life issues and I'm not qualified to deal with all that. So my time and resources, I'm 24 years old, not knowing how to deal with all that. But the kicker was, one of the elders of the church asked me to take his granddaughter out to our Bible study and out for dinner. And she was, and I'll just be very honest, she was a little vixen. And when I took her home that night, she came on to me in Grandpa's kitchen. And I pulled a Joseph. I said, I got to get out of here. And I remember driving down Pacific Coast Highway with my windows down, my little Toyota, just sucking air, just going, Lord, thanks for getting me out of here, because that was close. And so the next day I confessed. I went in and I called one of my pastors up, my bosses, and I said, hey, this is what happened. And that was pretty scary. And I'm pretty burned out, and I need help. And their response was, well, go take a 2-week sabbatical. And when I got back, they said, well, you're resigned. We're going to resign you. And we realized that you're not the right person for the job, which was really, really devastating for me, because that was the first, quote, healthy family that I thought I ever had. And they basically turned and kicked me out and said no. And the ironic part, Raymond, was they sent me to several counselors to get help. And I'm like, but I thought I did everything right. And the third counselor, because the counselors didn't know what to do with me, and the third one said, when I walk in, he goes, okay, first of all, you need to understand that your church and other churches in Orange County have a reputation of taking young men, and young men especially, and ripping them off the bosom of Christ and kicking them and putting them in ministry that's way over their head, and then basically chewing them up and spitting them out. So you have to realize, first of all, this was not your fault. And that was really healing to me. But the fact that this guy has an entire counseling practice geared towards burned out youth workers tells you something about the state of the church.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Dennis, you look like you were about to jump in.
Well, I was really tracking closely with Dave's description about the deep versus the wide. And I think that what's really haunting me as he's walking through this situation is I'm not really sure that the lives of a lot of youth pastors, whether they're formally educated or not, is much different today than it was for Dave's experience then. It's an institutional world going for an institutional brand. Dave, you were doing something weird there, and I'm really curious about our folks hearing the weird on this thing. What made people show up? What was the deep? How did the deep work for you?
Well, it wasn't programmed because I'm a broken person myself. So as a leader, I learned, and maybe it was intuitive, maybe it was just the spirit, but one of my mentors has always called me a confessional leader. And so when I get together with young people, I'm saying, man, I'm broke. I am a broken person. My background is broken. I need help. Let's all get together and pray and figure out the issues as broken people, what's God's calling us to do, and pray for healing. And we'd have prayer meetings. And can you imagine? And we're talking about college students on a Friday night that we'd get together, just, and it's not some formal prayer meeting. We're just going to get together and share our hearts and our pain and ask God to help us. Well, that thing exploded to the point where people kept showing up, and more people kept showing up, and kids were breaking down in tears, just pouring their life out before the Lord, and the Spirit would show up. And it was this beautiful thing that we all realized how broken we are, and our only hope is God intervening in our lives. So it wasn't a program. And then we'd worship, and we had people that were writing their own music, and they were just, and we and in contrast, at that point, this was a pretty large staff of pastors. They brought in a church growth expert. And back then, I think they probably still have him. He goes, "We need to know your 2 and 5 year projection and how you're going to grow this ministry." And I'm like, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. All I know is that we need to pray, seek God, and let him and do what he wants to do. And so program versus letting the Spirit lead, and just being very, very vulnerable with each other, and humble and open. And I think that made room for God to do some pretty amazing things.
What's interesting is I've been through situations in churches where it was clear that peacemaking sometimes collapses into simply compromising. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to rile up anybody's political agendas in this conversation, but I am trying to say that there are a number of people who will look at what they've been taught as they grew up as, this is what's right about a church. This is the way a church functions. This is what a church does. Mm-hmm. And then you have some homewrecker show up like Dave, who's going to do things completely different from the way the institution is supposed to function. And Dave's scaring people. I think you have as much a reaction of fear as you do of power wanting to lord over anything. And they're looking at Dave and they're going like, you're threatening the very model of who we are and what we are. And this sounds eerily like the New Testament, doesn't it, Dave? That you face something like this in the idea of deep versus the wide.
Yeah. And it was ironic. There's a lot of irony that goes into it. And I finally just did leave. I had the founding elder, the granddaughter that I had almost fallen with. He's the one that said, you know what, you need to leave. Because I remember they were asking for they're going to do a big building program, and we had actually gone to Mexico and done some things, and in a small village. And I came back and I said, hey, I need $500 to help resurrect this little church down in Mexicali, Mexico. And the church wouldn't give it to me. I'm like, okay, but you're asking for $5 million to do a building expansion. But isn't this like serving the poor and doing this? And I remember writing and I'm young and arrogant, and I put a note in the suggestion box because I was so ticked off. I said, please don't build. And the founding elder took me aside. He goes, we think you need to leave. I'm like, okay, fine. So I did, and we actually started a home church shortly after. I met my bride as we did on this little mission trip to Mexico. And a lot of the kids that were in my college group became the nucleus of this home group. And it was the same thing where we just got together, prayed, shared our lives, read scripture together, and that to this day has been the kind of foundation of some of the deepest friends we've ever had. But out of that, so to continue the story real quick, now what do we do? Because now I'm thinking, hold it, I thought I was called to be a full-time minister, quote, full-time minister, but that didn't work out so well. So God, what do you really want to do with our lives? And one of my mentors, because by that time my faith was I wouldn't say it was on the rocks, but it was severely challenged because so much of my faith was connected with church versus just following Jesus. So one of my key mentors, Pete Hammond from InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, he took me aside and he said, I think you need to go to Regent College and get to know a guy by the name of Paul Stevens up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Paul is also one of the pioneers of the faith and work movement, theology of work. And so I got up there and he saw how frustrated and angry I was. And he took me, we walked every week during the lunch hours. He was kind of talking me off the cliff. Because I needed to know what I believed. So I spent that first year there, and he had me take a class, kind of explore your gifting and your calling and what's your background and what's God's calling you to do. And I swore also I would never come back to Edgerton Gear. I mean, it was a horrible place for me. And I said, Lord, I will go anywhere on the planet, but just don't send me back there. And so at the end of this one class, that you do all these surveys, it came back and it kind of tells you, here's what your life calling is. And I still remember it came back and I was all excited and I opened it up, I get my paper back and it said, quote, you are ideally suited to run a small family-owned manufacturing business. And I screamed like, Lord, no, anywhere but no, no, it's got to be somewhere else. You got to have better plans for me. And long story short, Regent College allowed me to do a master's project on, because I did end up going to get a university degree in University of California, Irvine, in social sciences, which actually kind of has helped me a lot these days. But so we did a master's project, a field study. What would it look like to bring kingdom values into a family business, very dysfunctional family business? And what would that do to not only the business, but to the family? And so that was supposed to be a 6-month project, and that turned into 2 years. And I often say it was 2 years of hell, and then it got worse. Because when you bring the kingdom into a very dysfunctional place, all hell literally breaks loose, and that's what we had. And through that time period, and after, I mean, it was successful, but it was very painful. But after 10 years of hanging in here, I was destroyed. I mean, my marriage almost lost my marriage. I had 3 boys at the time. Could not figure out how to change this. I mean, I was trying to change the company, but trying to change a culture of 40 plus years that's so embedded in dysfunction and alcoholism and pornography and all that was very, very difficult. But we started to see change, and I started to get a different view that, yeah, I could see Jesus work anywhere in the world, but I don't think you can change a business like this. And that was the big hole in my faith that I think God needed to show me. It's like, yeah, I can be relevant anywhere, even in your messed up background and even in a gear shop. And that was, we came back. This will be my 33rd, 33rd year that I'm still here. And now we're seeing God just do it. It went from my prison to my happy place. And now I can't imagine being more relevant as a believer in this little gear shop than anywhere else in the world.
Okay, so the interesting question for me is, why wasn't this an instant turnaround? This is a question that we pursue a lot in the Disciple Dilemma. Our culture is geared to the microwave universe. You had to get through 10 years of anguish, right, to get this thing changed. The culture change for a believer in a corporation. Tell us just a little bit more about that 10 years, what you were trying to pour into that company to see the culture change.
Well, I think as a leader, we're trying to bring a whole new set of values, and in a secular world, and in a manufacturing arena, we can't just beat people up, beat them over the head with Bibles, right? I mean, we got to walk the walk, and people knew I came out of a quote ministry background, so they were kind of expecting to come back and preach at them. It's like, no, I need their trust. I need to walk with integrity. So it was things like, we're going to have open meetings, open communication. We're going to share almost everything about the business. We're going to talk about values and virtues. We're going to treat each other with respect. We're going to do what's best for everybody involved. And unfortunately, there was several cohorts of people who just were terribly selfish, very dysfunctional. Some guys were angry that I got rid of the quarter barrel of beer in the lunchroom fridge. How dare you take away our free beer? And those are my dad's closest buddies. Then I had a group that were younger that said, no, we deserve more and we don't trust you. So we're going to break into your computer records at the time and share wages with everybody and undermine all your authority. And eventually we're gonna try to start our own business apart from you and slander you to all of your customers. And it's just one thing after another. Out of the 17 employees at that time, I had only one person who didn't tell me off, because everybody had their own agenda, and it was everybody's just scraping and struggling to get what they want rather than seeing the bigger picture. And I really started to understand that we've got a really messed up group of people that have almost no faith, and their character is deplorable on so many levels. So during that time, I realized I got to have people of character. And that really shaped my perspective as an owner, that I can teach people skills, but man, the character part of it, that's a whole other ballgame. And so I started hiring, literally, I interviewed people to really dig deep and see what their character was. So over time, the bad people started to get outnumbered by the good people. And my dad was still a little bit involved, and, having to deal with the guys that he hired. I still remember one day I showed up to work, and Dad had been out at a local bar, over the weekend, and the guy showed up Monday morning. He goes, "Hey, I'm here for my job." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Oh yeah, your dad hired me the other night at the bar." And the guy had almost no skills. And so that's the kind of stuff I was dealing with. And it just took a long time to get people to trust and buy into what we were trying to do.
Boom. This is a really important point that I wanted to just focus in on. I'm so glad that Raymond and you are connected, because this is a statement I've heard Raymond make before, but I really want to emphasize this again.
Yeah.
You, as a business leader, are willing to release highly experienced people who are unwilling to pursue the mission and the culture that you really believe this organization is called to, in order to get people who you believe first have character, and second either have or can be taught skills. Did I get that right?
Correct. Dead on. Yep.
There is, to me, the basis of this conversation about discipleship. There are those who will follow Christ, and there are those who want to look good as if they were. There are those who will follow the leaders in a business, and those who just simply want to show up for the benefits. So, Raymond, I guess the thing that I'm hearing from Dave that I've heard from you in the past also is that character is so incredibly important. The identity of the human being is so incredibly important in the development of any organization, whether church or private. What do you think?
Oh, I think you're dead on. I was going to follow up with Dave that isn't this also one of the biggest problems we have in churches, is that we have people with skill sets who have their own personal calling from God, which isn't necessarily in conjunction with the culture and needs of that particular congregation. And so they're trying to follow their calling. And so it's a real challenge in many denominations, including ours. Pastors believe they have an individual calling from God, and so they're free to do whatever they think they need to do apart from what the church as a whole is desperately in need of. And so, but Dave, your notion of hiring key people that really have character goes counter to the sort of evangelical notion that I can turn anybody into a believer that can make a contribution. And yet you're saying within your business, and I think in the church too, you're really going to have to be very selective. We talked to Nick Westbrook. I don't know if you know Nick at all. He's Chick-fil-A down in Georgia.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Really a great guy. And his main intent in terms of running Chick-fil-A is he spends 2 or 3 weeks interviewing potential new employees. Yeah. And if they don't have a background that says they're already predisposed to see their life as serving other people, then he's just not going to hire them because they're just not temperamentally suited to the business.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny at the time too. You know, I'm talking 3 of these employees I'm talking about were supposed Christians. And one was just an older man who had great faith, but could not see how his job related to his faith at all. And 2 of the employees who ended up trying to sabotage and so they claim to be believers. And I'm going, what kind of believers are you where it's lip service, but it has no bearing on how you act, right? Your character has no bearing on what you profess to believe. So over the years, it's incredible now if you came in and saw, I don't interview people anymore. I let my staff handle it. But the number one thing they look for is humility. And we don't care about, and if they come out really strong and say they're a Christian, we go, uh-oh. You know, and that's a red flag. It really is, because, and we've had horrible examples and experiences of young believers coming in, and they think that their main role here is to proselytize and to judge and convert everybody else, while their work ethic was deplorable. And so what we look for, Raymond, like what you said, are they humble? Are they teachable? Are they predisposed to working in a team environment? Do they have a hunger to learn? Do they have a hunger for truth? There is truth. There is right and wrong. There's good and bad. Do they recognize that? And to me, when you have an organization full of those kind of people, it just changes everything. But those who don't connect their belief with their actions, like, no, I please go somewhere else, be somebody else's problem. And even in my book, you know, I've thought about all of this a lot. You know, almost all the parables, all of his teachings are related to the workplace, right?
Oh,
and you can, and the one part in my book that I write about, you know, our business is founded on the principles of value, quality, and service.
Right.
And one of the things I write about is, like, you know, you want a secret to a successful business, and it's so clear in Scripture. Basically, do what you say, what you're going to do. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I write on there how I'm imagining Jesus showing up at a job site, and the contractors aren't there, supplies didn't show up, people who promised them didn't come through, and the frustration of the marketplace. And when I read his words, I see that frustration born from experience of a broken world in the work world and people not following through, and it's maddening. But it's also an opportunity for us as believers to stand in such stark contrast. We have vendors who tell us we are by far, or customers, we are by far their best vendor. Why? Because we do what we promise. We say what we're going to do. And I think business from a Christian's perspective is a phenomenal platform to exhibit the, you know, kingdom work.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is just absolutely foundational and really interesting. And of course, Dennis and I have been interviewing people, and the biggest challenge we have with young people today is not they are afraid they're going to hell and they need to get out of hell free card. They believe their lives doesn't have any meaning at
Absolutely.
all, no purpose at all. And so you've really tried to address that, and with your Craftsman with Character program. And I want you to spend a little time talking about that. But I have to tell you, I've been telling people about it. And I say this, and so I need you to tell me that I've got it correct. I got a young 16-year-old kid here, and I look him in the eye and I says, look, I know you're important. I know you have meaningful skills. I know you're here to make a contribution. I know that because God made you. If you're here, by definition, you're important. You're not only important, you have skills and assets. And together, you and I need to figure out how you can make the contribution God made you to make.
Amen. You're right on.
Okay. Yeah. That's, to me, that's why when you said within the second week, all of a sudden they're opening up in a way they've never opened up before, because no one's ever talked to them this way, that their life has meaning and purpose.
Yeah. So going back, gosh, it's been 11, 12, 13 years ago. I'm dealing with the same issues that almost every business is. You know, we have an aging demographic. So what are we going to do for a younger workforce coming in? And our high schools, you know, back in the 90s started shutting down our tech ed departments or greatly reducing them. So we've lost an entire generation of young people being exposed to the trades of manufacturing. And now we're paying the price for that, right? I mean, we're like, how come we the kids? Because we never showed them. We got rid of all those great classes that we all grew up with. And so I ended up going back to school one more time because of a mentor, which again, go back to no high school teacher ever thought I was college material. And now I'm going to get my doctorate. That's ridiculous, but it's God's sense of humor. But I went back to study this issue of why these young people aren't coming into our jobs in the manufacturing and the trades, and that sense of loss and no sense of purpose. And as I read and dug and experienced our own issues in hiring, I realized, one, kids have no exposure to the working world. I mean, they just don't. I mean, whether they're gaming or whatever the social media is, or in their high schools, the teachers have no idea of what's out there for jobs. So it's an issue of exposure. But the other part of it is we don't teach kids the sense of purpose and everything you just said, that they are valuable, that the world needs them. They are gifted in different ways. And 50% of our population, at least 50%, are tacit learners. We learn through working with our hands, but our educational system is all geared to the theoretical. And so it's totally weighted the wrong way. So I realized that if we're going to solve this problem, and we came up with this course called Craftsman with Character, that 4 days a week, we get them in the workplace, just job shadowing, just getting them exposed to the work world and see all the opportunities in our communities. But the other part of it is the character. Do they understand how character is not just words, but they're skills for life? They are key to help you be successful. So how do you put those two together? Well, the kids, the way God created us is to learn from others, to be modeled, to be mentored. So we need to see how those character qualities are emulated and how they play out on the job site. And so we can talk about being a team player. We can talk about being teachable. We can talk about being organized and committed to excellence. But until the kids see that, they can't really put those, none of us can put those two together. So we ran a pilot program 11 years ago, and we just say, hey, would this work? And my local high school said, yeah, sure, give it a shot. And we ran a semester-long course where, again, the kids are job shadowing 4 days a week. 1 day a week, I got them in a classroom, and we explored worldview, character qualities, virtues, kind of case studies, dilemmas, what would you do, et cetera. And it was like magic. We couldn't believe how the transformation these kids, where our high school picked up the class, and we've been running it for 11 years now. And as you said, for the first time, these kids are being listened to. And we're not preaching at them. I call those of us who teach it, we call ourselves facilitators. We're facilitating a discussion, asking what's inside of these kids and what are they thinking, and have they ever thought about this, et cetera. They're telling us this is the first time anybody listened to them, anybody ever asked these questions. And so in the course of 16 weeks, we're seeing this phenomenal transformation where these kids, for the first time in their life, are going, wow, maybe I do have a place. And really quick, the Craftsman code, which we make the kids memorize, the first one is, I am not the center of the universe. And so as a dad, there's this great joy in making a teenager memorize that. And number two, I don't know everything or nearly as much as I think I do. And both of those are not smackdowns. Those are helping them realize that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? Our industry, no matter gear making or the foundry or steel can, whatever, plumbing, electricians, we all learn, stone making. I mean, Jesus came all the way down from, that's what he did, right? So it's an appreciation for the past, but it's also, are you teachable? And that every person has unique gifts and talents. That's number three. And number four, the world needs me. And when a kid starts understanding, gets it in their head and their heart, wow, really, I have a place in this world. That's the game changer. All of a sudden, you just set them free and they go. And, pay as reward for my efforts, but not my main motivation. And I missed one somewhere. I got to look at my list there. I'm sorry. There's dignity and purpose in knowing my trade, because again, in the blue collar world, we haven't given dignity just to the working class.
Oh, I think that's right. We're in such an unusual position today. I do think we're going through a Reformation kind of moment. And one of the Catholic guys who I listened to on lectures on the Reformation thought that Luther's idea of vocation was a bigger change than justification by faith. The fact that the maid sweeping the floor is pleasing to God in a way better than waking up at midnight and praying to try and impress him. And it really is amazing. So I really think we're in such an odd moment, because just like at the time of the Reformation, we have a smaller group of people coming into the workplace than leaving the workplace. So it's really an odd historical moment. And all of a sudden it shifts from me picking from 10 people, 3 people I want to give a job, and maybe one of them gets promoted, to a situation where there may be 3 people and 2 of them don't even want to talk to me, and the other one's not sure he wants to come to work for me. And so I have to engage young people in a way that really fires their imagination. Exactly. But I think it's the Holy Spirit confronting us with a notion that in today's world, John 3:16 is really, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to understand reality, their purpose in life, or the Father except through me. And so we really need to have the good news that your life is purposeful and you have meaning and you have value. And so I think your program just really is phenomenal in terms of trying to communicate that.
Well, and I've had Christians say, well, aren't you preaching Jesus at them? I go, well, hold on now. You got to really understand where these kids are at these days. We are in a post-Christian culture. So most of these kids have never been to church. They have no understanding of it. So I have to, to be a disciple, I mean, you have to prepare them for truth. You have to bring them along in a way that they want to know truth and hear truth. And one of my professors in Nigeria, he said, if you look at Scripture and with Jesus, salvation was not a prerequisite for discipleship. In fact, he said, if you look Jesus with his disciples, he was discipling them before they even understood what salvation meant. And I look at these young people that I deal with, and we need to cultivate them and encourage them and give them a vision and a hunger for truth, that their life matters. And the beauty of that is, once you give a kid a taste of truth, they're going to keep pursuing it. And I'd have young people who, if you go far enough in your pursuit of truth, you know where you're going to end up. And so my job is not to evangelize them and preach at them. It's to put them on that journey of faith that they'll end up where the Father wants them.
So let me circle back. One of the big challenges I see within all organizations, institutions, especially the church, some church that wants to become a mega church will adopt something that Willow Creek did, but it really requires the leadership that has an understanding and commitment to what that really is all about. And so with your program, you've been successful with it. How able have you been to communicate that to other business owners? I know that you've been talking to John Kane. He and I haven't had a chance to talk about you, but I know you've been talking to him over at Scott Forge. How interested are your other business leaders in emulating this and working with you?
Well, that's the thing that's kind of turned our world upside down in the last year, because we have branched out to other communities. I think we're going to be in almost every school in our county this next year. And every business I know has the same issue. And we don't want workers, we just don't need workers. We need good workers. And so as we've talked to other businesses and communities, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, how can we do this? And the Navy got a hold of us in February, and they said, we need this across the nation. Our manufacturing industrial base is desperate. We have an aging demographic, like we said. We're not getting our submarines on time. What's the problem? Well, it's the demographic. We don't have enough young people coming in. So the Navy got a hold of us in February, and now they are helping fund us with some pretty major dollars to expand literally across the country. So right now in Wisconsin, we're in the Milwaukee area. I've got contacts, in cities throughout the country saying, how can we do this? And the beauty to me of it is I'm discovering so many business leaders who get it. They understand that we need to be mentoring cultures. You want to make a difference in your community, you have to care for your young people, and you need to bring them into your businesses. And I love Eugene Peterson's quote where he said he contends that the workplace is probably the primary location for spiritual development. Couldn't agree more. And again, the kids don't need to be Christians. They need character development, spiritual development. And when you have them in a business 40, 50 hours a week, that's powerful. That's when you can really shape a life. So we have more opportunities right now than we know what to do with. I think it's a tremendous movement of the Spirit, where the Spirit's waking up business owners and saying, you have a key role in the spreading of the kingdom, and you have to embrace that.
The fundamental challenge. I can put great training online, but no kid is going to go online and learn how to run a CNC machine until he thinks it's valuable and important.
Exactly. And there are a lot of programs that are teaching skills. And my contention is you have to deconstruct their worldview first. We have to go back to the character part of it and give them that vision and help them understand where they fit. And then we can teach them anything. But again, the first part is, we got to work on that discipleship relationship first, and to help them feel valued. And they're not going to feel valued just by taking a course on a CNC lathe. They need to know people care about them, that literally want to help them. I've had kids say, "This is the first time in my life anybody's cared for me," and I often, I hear all these young people today. I mean, we're all older. We kind of look at the generation like our parents looked at us, right? They're worthless. They're not going to do anything. And I go, you know what? These kids desperately want to be mentored. And as older people, we want to mentor. That's the way God wired us. So our focus, the nucleus of our whole program is you're connecting older people with younger people in a godly way that's the way he meant it to be.
And yet what we find in the culture of education today, I'm going back to something that you two have been talking about that's critical, is that education has begun to adapt more of Nietzsche's and Max Weber's view of the universe. Let's produce knowledge-infused widgets that come off of the educational production line and can plug in to the corporate production line, and they have no capacity to think critically. They have no idea of meaning, purpose, identity, belonging. Those things are completely absent. And what you're providing here, Dave, is you're providing first the framework of who they are, who they actually are, and then hanging on that scaffold, the knowledge of how to operate in a particular industrial environment. Now, that's a completely different universe. Augustine kept talking about the tragedy when Cicero and Latin become the most valued things instead of the framework of meaning and identity in God as we look at all this sort of stuff. And I love where you're taking this, because discipleship begins with non-believers being invited to come and check out truth. And like you said a few minutes ago, if you're going to follow the trail of truth, you ain't going to be wandering all over the universe. You're going to be heading down one very interesting path that's going to show up at one very interesting place. So here's a question for you guys, okay? And I mean this for both of you. I want to ask this question: is it possible for character, capitalism, Christianity to coexist in the corporate world?
Go ahead, Raymond.
Yeah, no, this is an easy one. If you're not a capitalist, you're not a Christian. Jesus gave the parable of the talents that says, if you're not getting an increase on the assets you have that are important, then you're not fruitful. You're not in the kingdom. So fundamentally, capitalism is something Jesus commanded us to do. It's in fact the very first creation mandate. Go and be fruitful and multiply.
Okay, I like that.
Fundamentally, capitalism is Christianity.
A bunch of people who are sitting on this podcast, so they're going like, no, not really. You Wall Street guys, you industrialists, Atlas shrugged. Let's get through all this stuff for a minute, and let's look at the reality that you guys are exploiting the universe. How do you deal with the tension? There's a tension, right, between capitalism and capital formation. There's a tension between Christianity, character, capital formation, and corporations. How do you talk to people about both sides of that and then say, here's the better path?
Oh, in manufacturing, we have a different set of challenges. So I think your analysis of the challenges of capitalism and Christianity, for people who write software, for people who do finances, for people who are in transactional businesses, where I take money from somebody, give it to somebody else, and keep a buck every time I do a transaction. Those are challenging businesses from a Christian perspective. So if we get David Bahnsen or somebody on, they can straighten me out on how good it is to have all of those financial institutions. But in manufacturing, we're fundamentally doing the ruling over and subduing the earth stuff. and we have to do it profitably. The parable of the talents is not about evangelism. It's not about character development. It is about every single vocational role God has called me into. I'm supposed to be advancing his kingdom.
Dave, this guy's trying to sell us this idea that you industrials are pure, the driven snow is lovely, everything is just nice and good. Help me out here a little bit. Let's straighten him up a little bit and deal with this. I mean, it's a dark world, right, Dave? I mean,
it's terrible. Yeah. Well, there's sin, and I abhor Wall Street in a lot of ways, and the capitalists who are so freaking greedy that, and I'm experiencing, I get calls almost every week. Hey, we want to buy your company because we see how profitable you are, and we are going to rape it, strip it down, flip it, and put your people out to pasture. I mean, in our industry, I see that so many times, it's deplorable. So to me, we often hear capitalism with a conscience. We need believers who are very cognizant of the sin and the greed and the selfishness that's out there. But capitalism with a servant attitude that says, I exist to serve my community. I am going to save, I'm going to give, I'm going to work to the betterment of everybody around me. And that's my top priority. So as a business owner, as a Christian, you take servant leadership, seriously, that's got to be your life. And that I serve my employees, I serve my customers, I serve my vendors, because that's what the upside down kingdom looks like. It has no hint of selfishness. We have to make a profit. Profit is not a dirty word, but you have to do it within reason. And I write about in my book, we analyze pretty much every job that goes through our shop. Were we selfish? Did we make too much? What is too much? Is there such thing as making too much? And you have to bring prayer and the wisdom of the Spirit, I think, to everything we do as business owners, because there is that tension, Dennis, but it's supposed to be a tension. We're in a broken world, and if we're going to be different, we have to wrestle with these issues every day.
I want to ask one other question then, and then leave it to Raymond for our wrap up. Dave, you've been through some significant pressure as a leader. You've lived through this tremendous black star mass gravity to drag you into burnout, fatigue, overwork, workaholism, as you phrased it a minute ago. What advice do you have for Christian leaders who are trying to be followers of Christ, and they're in the business world as an entrepreneur, as a significant leader? What's your advice now, looking back on your experience?
Number one priority is you have to understand who you are, how broken you are, how toxic you are, what addictions you are, what your weaknesses are. And you have to bring that, basically, not to use cliches, but to the cross. You have to allow God to help you heal and understand. And it's a daily process, because you give who you are. And if you don't get an understanding of that, you're going to make your company more toxic. You're going to bring that toxicity to your family, and you're going to burn out, or you're going to be more destructive than you are productive. And so when I talk to people all the time about it, don't waste your years just pursuing success and pursuing the dollar. Your success will be determined by allowing God to work in you and through you to be a man or woman of God. And I can't emphasize that enough, because everything else will take care of itself. But it's too tragic that we get to the end of our careers and we wake up and like, man, what did I accomplish? And you look at the wrecking ball that you've been in relationships, and you realize your testimony is crap, because all you did was live for yourself and you steamrolled so many people. And so number one priority, get right with God and get yourself right with God. And don't think that you're right with God just because you prayed a prayer. For me, my personal routine, every morning I get up and I sit quietly and I said, Lord, where do I need to be better today? Where do I need to be healing? Where are those pain points in myself? Where's that anxiety that I'm feeling? Help me understand that and bring your Spirit and your wisdom into me. So when I walk into my shop, my office today, I am the fragrance of who you want me to be, instead of putrid crap that's infecting everybody around me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. We had a conversation with a friend, and he was trying to counsel someone who's really messed up their life. And the guy said, I feel like I'm crap. And and he said, so you're in good company. I mean, that's what Martin Luther said. That's what Augustine said.
That's right.
You really can't be a Christian unless you can admit that you're a piece of crap.
Every day, and it's not something that it's not self-loathing. It's not that. It's just a realization that I'm a broken person that, except by the grace of God, there go I, right? And it's allowing the grace of God to flow in us and through us to everything around us every day.
I want to take another 2 or 3 minutes of your time.
Sure.
You've said something I think that's incredibly valuable. When Dennis and I have talked to people in ministry, especially people in church environments, one of the challenges they face is they already have a full plate of activities. And when you say discipleship, they think that means they have to do another program. And if you say they have to do it personally by developing relationships, they don't know how in the world they have the time to do that.
So I think 2 topics can come up. One is it's a no-brainer because you just follow Jesus's model. You start off with a small group of men, you take them deep, and they just keep multiplying, and it's pretty simple. But the problem is the church looks at that and said, well, we need to do that within the church. And we need to have all these little cell groups, and we need to have discipleship groups. And again, it's building the, kind of the vision or the calling of the pastor. And what that pastor really needs to do is to look at his business folks and the leaders in this community and say, I want to help you be mentors and disciple makers in your own companies and your own field of influence, right? And that's a completely different model because one, it takes the burden off the pastor and the church, and you put it into all those people that you've taken for granted that you've always never looked at as ministers that are throughout your community, right? Just equip them, empower them, and tell them they are the ministers. They are the discipleship makers. Go to their workplaces and help them understand how to do that. And so in my business, that's what I've done. I've had my core group of men who I've discipled, and then they are multiplying. So the beauty of our Craftsman course right now, and this is kind of my punchline, is, when you talk a lot of companies manufacturing, what their average age of their workforce is. I was speaking in Milwaukee last week, and I asked one large company, what's the average? And they're like, 300 employees, and you'd recognize the manufacturer if I mentioned their name. But they said, the guy looked at me, he goes, yeah, I think the average age is like 55 on our shop floor. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I said, my shop average age is 28. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, I've got guys who were flunking out of high school, D students. Nobody gave them a chance. They are some of my most phenomenal young leaders. And the amazing thing to me, that's a work of God kind of coming full circle, why this is my happy place right now. So I've got a group of late 40s, early 50 guys that are mentoring, discipling a group of 30-somethings. Those 30-somethings are now mentoring the 25-somethings. Those 25-somethings are now mentoring the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. So we have this multi-tier mentoring that's happening that is absolutely beautiful. And I just have to show up and just kind of be a coach and just kind of still run the business. But it has taken all the pressure off of me where I can just rely on my guys and kind of keep coaching and helping them. But to see that multi-generational discipleship mentoring happen in my business is just absolutely beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, Dave, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we're going to want to revisit with you because, as you know, this is a real passion that I have, and I think it's a real ministry in the church. But more fundamental than that, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel itself, that I'm supposed to be a disciple in everything I do and every person I am. So I think that's really valuable, and you've been great.
Yeah. We have a website up, craftsmanwithcharacter.org. We have a foundation now that we are helping folks literally across the country get this started. So if you look at our website, craftsmanwithcharacter.org or cwcharacter.org, we just redid our website, just went live with a whole new update last week. And we're hiring staff to figure out how to scale up to help the Navy get submarines quicker. But through there, feel free to contact us. And I'm more than happy to share. And if you have a vision and a passion for your business and how to really mentor this next generation, I'd love to talk to you.
And your book, Good Work, where would I get that?
You can buy it on Amazon. It's also published by Moody Publishers, so you can find it in both places. Good work. It's been out for a couple of years, but again, it kind of gives us a vision of hopefully how a blue collar business can be really impactful for the kingdom.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipleddilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.